Back in May 2023, news of a murder blew up almost overnight. The victim was a young woman, and the state she was found in was hard to even put into words. Her abdomen had been cut open, her internal organs exposed. Burns covered nearly her entire body. There was no ID on her, just the strong smell of some kind of flammable liquid clinging to what was left on her flesh. The police were stunned, and so was everyone who heard about it. No one could imagine the kind of person who would be capable of an act like this. Eventually, investigators put a name to her and discovered a suspect too. But somehow, the suspect ended up garnering sympathy. This is the story of how a young woman was murdered in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. A case that lit up Malaysian social media and stuck with people long after. This is the Nur Anisah Abdul Wahab murder case. Most of us spend a fair amount of time just waiting, for an order, for someone running late, for the day to wind down, and we fill it by scrolling. I started thinking about how much of that time adds up and whether any of it could actually pay off. And that's what led me to this app called FreeCash. And I wasn't convinced at first because these things usually promise more than they deliver. But I figured there was no harm in testing it. So I actually tried it, and it's really simple. You pick a game or task, complete it, earn coins, and cash out. And of course, you will have to do certain things like downloading the game and turning on app tracking so the rewards count. I chose a game that I already play, and I just went from there. And to be very clear, this won't make you rich, obviously, and it does require a lot of time. But considering I'm on my phone anyway, it's a reasonable trade. The same routine, with a small payoff attached. If you're concerned it might not be legitimate, they have hundreds of thousands of Trustpilot reviews and a 4.7-star rating. It's not instant, but they do pay. The link's below if you want to try it, and signing up through mine gets you a $10 bonus after your first offer, and it's entirely free. It's a practical way to make your downtime count for a little more, so why not? Enjoy. Her body was found on the morning of May 23rd, 2023, at around 8 o'clock. A local farmer came by to cut grass at Kampung Sungai Limau, a small rural town in northern Malaysia. There, among the grass, he spotted a black object lying at the edge of a water well. He stared at it for a moment before deciding to get a closer look, but a few steps in, he caught a smell. Something burned, mixed with the smell of gas. Someone had set something on fire there, and whatever was in front of him was what remained. His first thought was that maybe someone had illegally torched a pile of trash, but the longer he looked, the more the shape started to remind him of something familiar. It wasn't garbage, it was a dead body. The whole scene sent him into a panic. He'd never imagined witnessing something like this in real life. He dropped everything he had been carrying and called the police. Officers arrived on the scene and got to work immediately. The body was badly burned, the clothing almost completely destroyed, and the abdomen was cut open. But upon further inspection, they found defensive wounds on her hands, a sign she'd fought to get away before she was killed. The grass around her was burned too, which told investigators she'd been set on fire right there where she lay. But strangely, the burn pattern suggested that the body had been set alight not once, but twice. That detail raised immediate questions about the killer's behavior. Had they really set fire to her 2 times? They found more. The soil showed tire marks running from the path deep into the grass and ending right near the body. Somebody had traveled there by car recently. Just like the farmer who found her, the investigators picked up a strong smell of gasoline, along with some pieces of metal and burned plastic. They also discovered small spots on the ground beneath the body, dried blood stains. Looking at the charred, mutilated remains of the victim, it was obvious the murder had been violent. Whoever did this hadn't just wanted her dead, they'd wanted to erase her completely. There was one more piece of evidence near the scene, a slip of paper with an image on it. That turned out to be a major lead, one that pointed toward a heartbreaking truth hidden in the tall grass of that plantation. The paper showed an ultrasound image. The body was taken to the hospital for an autopsy. The victim had suffered blunt force injuries. She'd been stabbed multiple times. Her throat was slit, her stomach cut open, and they confirmed exactly what the ultrasound image had suggested. She'd been pregnant, around 4 months pregnant. That detail reframed the entire case. Just considering that possibility stirred up a lot of complicated emotions for the team. Whoever this woman was, her family had to be out there somewhere, and the investigators' resolve to crack the case only grew stronger, for her and for the baby. With the ultrasound image found at the scene, they started canvassing clinics in the area. A private medical office confirmed they'd recently examined a pregnant woman who was 18 weeks along. She'd come in for a routine check on the baby and asked for a copy of the image. The police saw the copy still saved in the clinic's database. It matched the image found at the scene. That's how they finally identified the victim, 21-year-old Nur Anisah Abdul Wahab. The police moved quickly and notified her family, who told them they hadn't been able to reach her since the day before her body had been discovered. Word got around fast. People in Anisah's circle learned about her horrific death. And like the investigators, they wanted to know who could have done this to her. After all, she was loved. Anisah worked hard and lived life on her own terms. She was a waitress, putting in long days for a modest paycheck just to keep things moving. The people who knew her, friends, family, her sister, described her as humble, someone who kept her loved ones close. She may have been strong and independent, but even strong, independent people need someone to lean on sometimes, and that's where Fakrul came in. Muhammad Fakrul Ayman Sajali, Fakrul for short, was 20. He didn't come from money. Like Anisah, he came from a humble background, and people would describe him as a kind, down-to-earth guy. He was smart too, enrolled at a good university with a 3.8 GPA. The two of them started out as friends, but that friendship turned into something deeper, and Fakrul became a kind of safe harbor for her. They were together for about a year, and like a lot of relationships, theirs had its highs and lows, except their relationship seemed to be running into trouble. They'd fight, they'd break up, they'd get back together and start the whole cycle over again. And then came the bombshell. Anisah was pregnant. The news rattled them both. This wasn't supposed to happen. A child born outside of marriage isn't something that's readily accepted in Malaysian society, where a lot of people still hold tightly to religion and tradition. A child like that was unlikely to be welcomed by the parents' families or their community. And Anisah, as the mother, carried the heaviest burden. The stress started eating away at her. She went to Fakrul about it, but he wanted nothing to do with the baby. She kept pleading with him to claim it as his own. On top of that, two family members, the husband of Anisah's sister and the husband of her cousin, started to lean on Fakrul too, pressuring him to admit he was the father. Fakrul didn't believe the baby was his, but he was being pushed to take responsibility anyway. The pressure kept building until he felt completely cornered. And he decided that he was going to get out of that corner no matter what. The night of May 22nd, 2023, Fakrul sent Anisah a text asking to meet up. But before he picked her up, he got some things ready. A knife that he stashed under the seat of his car, and a 20-liter plastic bottle. At around 8:30 p.m., he drove over to the restaurant where Anisah worked. On the way, he pulled into a gas station, not to fill up the gas tank, but to fill the plastic bottle he'd brought. Anisah, meanwhile, was waiting with something she wanted to show him, an ultrasound image of their 18-week-old baby. But instead of the serious conversation she might have been hoping for, the two of them fell back into the same fight. She insisted the baby was his. He insisted it wasn't. It was the same argument as always. He was furious and he just kept driving out toward the empty roads of the plantation until it was around 10 p.m. He pulled the car over and got out, with Anisah following him. It was dark and the road was deserted. He then suddenly grabbed a heavy stick and struck her in the head, hard, not once or twice, but over and over. She was left lying in agony on the ground while he went back to the car for the knife. Then he dragged Anisah, injured and pregnant, to a drain. He looked around, no one in sight. He was ready to do what he'd come to do. Anisah was terrified. She tried desperately to protect herself, but it was no use. He stabbed her, slit her throat, and cut open her abdomen. And then he tried to pull the fetus out of her body with his hand. He couldn't, so he walked back to the car to get the gasoline he'd prepared. He knew he'd done something monstrous, and he knew there would be consequences. But at this point, all he could think about was getting rid of the evidence. So he set her on fire. The body of a young woman, beaten, killed, mutilated, and burned by a man she'd trusted, a man she'd hoped to build a family with. Fakhrul left the scene and went about his business as if nothing had happened. He drove home like it was any other night. The thing is, the thought of what he'd done kept gnawing at him. His primary concern wasn't the feeling of guilt. It wasn't the weight of what he'd done. He was afraid someone might still be able to recognize Anisah and identify her. So, on the morning of May 23rd, at around 7 a.m., he went back, poured more gasoline on her body, and burned her a second time, trying to destroy all evidence of his crime. What he didn't count on was how fast the police would move, because while Fakhrul was trying to convince himself that he'd covered his tracks, the investigation was progressing rapidly. In a lot of investigations, murder cases especially, the police start with the people closest to the victim, because they usually have the strongest motive. So once they had Anisah's identity, investigators started piecing together everything they could about her personal life, including her friends and her romantic history. Naturally, Fakhrul's name came up. Their relationship was no secret, and neither were their arguments. People said they'd seen him arguing with her in public more than once. The arguments, the pregnancy, these things pointed to a possible motive. But these facts alone weren't enough. They needed real evidence. Going back to the scene, investigators followed up on the tire marks they'd found in the grass. They measured them and started pulling footage from CCTV cameras along the street. And there it was. Late on the night of May 22nd, a car had passed by the road and driven into the grass. It was a small sedan, the same type of car Fakhrul owned. They compared the measurements to his tires, and they matched. They also pulled footage from a gas station where, on May 22nd, Fakhrul was caught on camera buying a large amount of fuel and pouring it into a big bottle. That was a clear link between him and the crime scene. Several witnesses who'd been around Anisah the day she was killed also confirmed seeing her with Fakhrul on May 22nd, the last time anyone saw her alive. They brought him in for questioning, and he admitted he'd seen Anisah on May 22nd, but he claimed he'd taken her home safe and had no idea what happened to her afterwards. Through the whole interview, his tone remained calm. He was strangely composed for a man who had just lost his girlfriend under truly horrific circumstances. One of the investigators looked him over and noticed some fresh-looking scratches on his arm. The evidence against him just kept piling up. They seized his phone for analysis, and the messages between the two of them came to light. Before the murder, it turned out they'd been arguing about Anisah's pregnancy, even floating the idea of terminating it. They also traced the phone's location on May 22nd, which placed it near where Anisah was found. Everything pointed to Fakhrul. And just like that, on May 23rd, the same day Anisah's body was found, an arrest warrant went out. Fakrul was picked up at his home. He denied the accusation at first, but he didn't resist the arrest, almost as if he'd known the police were coming. Once the warrant was issued, investigators could search his house and car freely, and they recovered the knife and the stick. There was nowhere for Fakrul to run. Buried under all that evidence, he finally admitted what he'd done. The way he told it, the killing had been an attempt to escape the pressure Anisah was putting on him before the pregnancy became public knowledge and before she gave birth. On June 1st, 2023, he was charged at the Sungai Besar Magistrates Court with the murder of Nur Anisah Abdul Wahab, a charge carrying a maximum penalty of death. Despite things progressing quickly to that point, the legislative process went much more slowly, and the case was referred to the High Court. On May 15, 2024, the High Court allowed Fakrul to be evaluated by a psychiatrist. But every result came back the same. He was fully fit to be held responsible for everything he'd done. At some point, Fakrul decided not to fight, and he changed his plea to guilty. On September 29, 2025, Fakrul once again admitted to the crime. He had to walk through every grisly detail of the murder. The prosecution laid out 112 pieces of evidence gathered during the investigation, from the ultrasound image to what remained of the victim's clothing. Everything was put before the public, and the whole nation was shaken by it. The judge didn't hide her own distress, especially knowing Fakrul hadn't taken just the life of his girlfriend, but also that of her unborn child. Fakrul's lawyer argued for a lighter sentence, prison rather than death, claiming his client had acted out of rage after being made a scapegoat for Anisah's quote-unquote sin. The lawyer said a DNA test conducted on the fetus showed the baby was never Fakrul's, and that he'd simply been left holding the blame for someone else's mistakes. That, combined with the pressure from Anisah's family members, had put him under serious mental strain. The defense also argued that he'd always behaved well and had no criminal record before the murder. On October 15, 2025, the Malaysian High Court sentenced Fakrul to death. Judge Norazlin Othman said the court was satisfied with his confession and noted that the facts, his admission, and the evidence all lined up to tell the same story. In this case, it wasn't one life that was taken, but two. The victim had been killed and her body treated in a horrific way. Her throat slit, stabbed, struck with a blunt object, her abdomen cut open and her organs exposed, dragged from one spot to another, and her body burned twice. Given the nature of the crime, the planning involved, the cold-blooded calculation, the lengths he went to cover his tracks, the court handed down the harshest sentence available: death. When the verdict was read, Fakrul shut his eyes. His hands were trembling, but he seemed to have accepted it. Anisah's family wept while holding her photo. His family wept too. Fakrul's lawyers filed an appeal, and on May 14, 2026, the Court of Appeal in Putrajaya commuted the death sentence to 40 years in prison, plus 12 strokes of the cane. A 3-judge panel weighed his age at the time of the crime. He was just 20 years old, along with mitigating circumstances such as the DNA results, showing that he was not the father of the child. The prosecution had pushed to keep the death penalty, arguing that the sheer cruelty of the killing outweighed his youth. If a person is not too young to commit a serious offense under the law, then he is not too young to suffer the penalties prescribed by the law, the deputy public prosecutor told the court. In the end, the panel landed on the prison term instead. The legal process may have run its course, but the case left something behind that Malaysians haven't been able to shake. Local media called it one of the most disturbing cases in recent memory, with the public openly furious at Fakrul, especially as the details about Anisah's pregnancy spread. But not everyone was angry. Some people actually came out in support of him. One online comment even read, "Your handsome brother, repent and ask forgiveness from the One. Al-Fatiha for the deceased." Still, compared to the flood of people condemning the crime, his supporters were only a small fraction of the overall response. Most of the comments and public discussion centered on a worry about the moral decline of young people. Not just because of the suspect asking for a reduced sentence, but because of the sense that the youth had drifted from their traditional values and embraced a more modern kind of relationship, the kind that led to a child out of wedlock. We don't know if Anissa was aware that Fakrul was not the true father of her child. Regardless of paternity, Fakrul's actions cannot be justified. No amount of societal pressure leads a normal person to commit such an atrocity. The father of the baby has not announced himself, and the only person with any idea was cruelly silenced forever. So, what do you make of this case? Let me know in the comments below, and that is all for today. Thanks for watching. And if you haven't yet, my FreeCash link is below. The $10 bonus is there after your first offer. Free to join and an easy way to get something back from time you'd spent regardless.